I have walked out of the jaws of a living hell. If anyone were to ask me what purgatory looks like, I would tell them it does not lie beneath the underworld, nor does it hide in the dark abyss of the afterlife. True hell is standing utterly helpless as a monstrous wall of black water swallows everyone you have ever loved, leaving you alive, cursed to bear the crushing weight of that memory day after agonizing day. My name is Alden. I was born and raised in Oakhaven, a modest settlement nestled at the foot of the Mistvale Mountains. For generations, our people lived by the grace of the Silver River. In the spring, it nourished our wheat fields. In the summer, it yielded silver-scaled fish. In the autumn, barges carried our harvest down its currents, and in the winter, its waters sustained our cold-weather crops. To us, the river was a maternal spirit, a life-giver. None of us could have foreseen that she would become our executioner. In the spring of my 19th year, the heavens opened, and it rained continuously for nearly a moon. At first, no one paid it any mind. Rainy seasons were common enough. The elders still tended the fields, children still played along the banks, and I spent my days accompanying my father into the highlands to chop timber and trap wild rabbits to sell at the local market. We were not wealthy. Our estate consisted of a 3-room stone cottage, 2 acres of rocky soil, and an old plow ox that had served my father for over a decade. My father, Robert, was an honest, simple man whose integrity was known throughout the valley. My mother, Margaret, spent her days selling fresh cheese at the square. And my little brother, Liam, just 10 winters old, was as mischievous as a forest imp but possessed a heart of gold. I used to think that as long as we had our health, our poverty mattered little. Until the true deluge began. By the 15th day, the river had swallowed the stone docks. By the 18th day, the earthen levees began to weep water. The panicked villagers gathered at the banks, but the town bailiff's men arrived on horseback, shouting that the King's Dam upstream had just been reinforced by royal decree and was as solid as iron. Anyone caught spreading traitorous panic would face 20 lashes at the post. The local magistrate himself stood upon the stone walls, laughing, proclaiming that a mere spring shower could not move mountains. We believed them. My father believed them. The whole valley believed them. Only a few old graybirds shook their heads, staring gloomily at the bruised, blackened sky. That fateful night, I was shaken from my sleep by the frantic, maddened barking of Barnaby, our hound. He tore at the heavy wooden door, letting out long, mournful howling cries I had never heard before. As I swung my legs out of bed, the very earth shuddered. A catastrophic boom echoed from the upper canyons, sounding as if a titan's axe had split the mountain in two. Before I could even process the sound, screams of terror cut through the dark from the edge of the village. "The dam has broken! Run for your lives!" I threw open the door. Under a brilliant flash of lightning, I witnessed a nightmare that will haunt me until the day I die. A towering wall of black water, taller than the highest oak trees, came roaring down the valley. It carried a violent churn of shattered pine trees, collapsed cottages, wagons, livestock, and the bloated bodies of those already claimed upstream. In a single heartbeat, the first row of houses vanished. The screams of drowning families and children bled into the deafening roar of the flood, sounding like the laughter of a demon. My father lunged toward the barn. He bellowed that the old ox was our only livelihood. We couldn't leave him to drown. I fell to my knees, grabbing his boots, begging him to run for the hills. But he merely placed a rough hand on my head and spoke the words that would echo across 2 lifetimes. "I'll be right back, son." He never returned. A massive timber struck him from behind, and in the blink of an eye, he was swallowed by the Black Sea. My mother, clutching my weeping little brother, dragged me up the rocky slopes behind the village. We were less than 100 paces from safety. Just then, the collapsing roof of a neighboring manor was hurled through the air by the current, striking my mother squarely. I lunged forward, grabbing her hand, but her fingers, cold and slick with mud, slipped through my grasp inch by inch. I screamed until my throat bled. She managed one final, tragic smile before the dark water pulled her under. Liam wailed for mother. I scooped him into my arms and sprinted, but a secondary wave slammed into us like a battering ram. It tore my little brother from my grip. I thrashed through the torrent like a madman searching for him, until a floating log struck my temple, and the world went black. When I awoke, I was lying on a makeshift rescue barge. Oakhaven was gone. Our home was gone. My family was gone. There was only a stagnant, muddy ocean stretching to the horizon. After the deluge came the great famine. After the famine, the bloody flux and plague. The living fought like beasts over bowls of watery broth. The dead piled so high that no one had the strength to dig graves. Every morning, the first task was not to find bread, but to see who had perished in the night. I managed to survive for 3 miserable moons before the fever finally took me. Lying in a ruined, leaking chapel, I watched the relentless rain fall through the shattered ceiling. I didn't curse the heavens. I only hated my own utter weakness. If only I had been stronger. If only I had dragged my father away by force. If only I had forced them up the mountain sooner, they might have lived. I closed my eyes, making a desperate prayer to whatever gods were listening. If there is any mercy left in this cruel world, give me one more chance. Just one. I will give anything to save them. My consciousness drifted into the void. I expected the peace of the grave. Instead, when my eyes snapped open, the first thing I heard was the familiar, sharp crowing of our rooster from the courtyard. The rich, earthy aroma of hot barley porridge drifted through the window. A gentle, melodic voice called out from the doorway. "Alden, still abed? Rise and shine, lazy bones. Eat your breakfast. You're helping your father haul wood from the highlands today." My entire body froze. Wooden bowls. A sturdy trestle table. The old thatch-roofed cottage. Everything was intact, untouched by the devastating hand of the floodwaters. I stumbled out of my room. My father sat on a bench, sharpening his felling axe beneath the apple tree. My mother was just stepping out of the kitchen hearth carrying a steaming pot of porridge. My little brother Liam was chasing Barnaby around the yard, his laughter ringing clear as silver bells. Tears cascaded down my face instantly. I threw my arms around them, holding them with a terrifying desperation. My father chuckled, patting my head with his calloused hand, joking that I must have had a nightmare about wood witches. They did not know that I had truly crawled back from the depths of hell. I looked up at the sky, far past the mountain peaks. The first faint wisps of dark, ominous clouds were quietly gathering. A number burned into my mind with terrifying clarity. 20 days. Only 20 days remained before the King's Dam would shatter. But this time, I would rewrite our destiny. I knew that if I spoke the plain truth, my father would think I had lost my wits, and the magistrate would throw me into the dungeons for sedition. To save my family, I needed a catalyst, a sign that these traditional, God-fearing folk could not ignore. That evening, as we sat over a meager supper of root vegetable stew and rye bread, I slammed my wooden spoon onto the table. The sudden noise startled Liam, causing his crust of bread to drop into his bowl. My father frowned, his brow furrowing with stern disapproval. "Alden, what is wrong with you today? You've been staring into space for hours, and now you bring such poor manners to the table?" I stood up, dropped to my knees before my parents, and bowed my head to the stone floor. Looking straight into my father's eyes, I spoke with absolute gravity. "Father, mother, forgive me, but I have received a vision. Last night, the ancient spirit of the Mistvale Mountains came to me in a dream." At the mention of the old spirits, my mother's hand trembled, spilling broth onto the table. Valley folk held a deep, ancestral reverence for the mysteries of the mountains. My father struck the table with his palm. "Blasphemy! The spirits are not toys for a boy's imagination. Stand up at once! It was no imagination!" I cried out, my voice cracking with the genuine terror of my past life. The spirit appeared wrapped in a shroud of blood-red mist. He warned that the king's dam is rotting from within. Within 20 days, a terrible deluge will strike, water will cascade from the peaks like a broken sea, and that dam will burst. He commanded us to sell our ox, stockpile grain, and build a sanctuary on the high rocky ridge behind the village. If we do not, Oakhaven will become a graveyard. Slap! A hard blow caught my cheek, leaving the taste of copper in my mouth. My father stood, shaking with fury, pointing a finger at me. Ungrateful boy! Do you comprehend what you are asking? That old ox is the hands and feet of this household. Without him, how do we till the soil? How do we eat? The king's dam was built by the king's own masons. If the reeve or the Lord's men hear you whispering such treason, our land will be seized, and you will rot in a gallows cage. I didn't flinch. I bowed again. Father, if the ox is gone, we can buy another if we live. If we die, what use is a beast of burden? I beg you, trust me just this once. He raised his hand again, but my mother threw herself over me, weeping. Robert, stop. Don't strike him any more. She looked at me, her eyes filled with profound anxiety. She could see the naked, raw horror in my gaze, a terror no 19-year-old could possibly counterfeit. My father spat into the hearth, grabbed his coat, and stormed out into the dark. The next morning, as he prepared to head out with his axe, I blocked the threshold. Father, if you do not believe my words, grant me a wager. The spirit gave a sign. Today, precisely at noon, the heavens will pour, and the western ridge 3 miles out will suffer a massive landslide. The rockfall will completely bury the main irrigation canal of Oakhaven. If it does not happen, you may break my legs and hand me over to the magistrate yourself. My father stared at me, a complex mix of anger and sudden apprehension in his eyes. He stayed home, sitting on the porch, his eyes locked onto the distant western ridge. The morning passed under a deceptively clear, blue sky. But as noon approached, the air grew thick, suffocating, and strangely hot. Suddenly, monstrous black clouds rolled over the peaks like spilled ink. A violent crack of thunder tore through the valley, and a torrential downpour slammed into the thatch roof. My father stood up, his fists clenching. Right at the stroke of noon, a horrific, grinding roar vibrated through the valley floor. It sounded like 1,000 iron chariots charging into battle. From across the fields, we watched an entire section of the western ridge collapse, sending thousands of tons of rock and mud cascading down, completely obliterating the irrigation canal. The time, the place, it matched my memory down to the exact second. My father stood frozen, his felling axe slipping from his hand and burying its blade into the mud. My mother clutched Liam, her face stark white. I approached my father and knelt in the mud before him. The first omen has come to pass, father. Will you believe me now? That night, my father didn't touch his pipe. He simply stared into the dying embers of the hearth as the rain hammered the roof like a ticking clock of doom. At dawn, he called me out to the yard. Staring at our old ox, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. This beast has been with me since the day I wed your mother, Alden. He is our life. But today, we sell him. Your mother and I will try to quietly warn our kin and the neighbors. We must try. We took the ox to the town market under a driving rain. Sensing our desperation, the predatory merchants squeezed us, offering a mere 4 silver sovereigns for an animal worth 10. My father looked away in agony, but I snatched the coins. Combined with my mother's life savings, we had 6 silver sovereigns and 200 copper pence. I dragged my father straight to the grain merchants. Instead of expensive white flour, I bought sacks of dried potatoes, coarse rye, rock salt, and bushels of cheap bran. Coarse food is unpalatable, but it lasts forever, costs less, and sustains more lives. I then spent our remaining coppers at the apothecary, buying every ounce of anti-fever bark, charcoal filters, and jugs of high-proof moonshine for disinfection. The grain merchant scoffed at us. "Stockpiling swine feed for the winter already, Robert. You've truly lost your senses." I said nothing, helping my father haul the heavily laden cart back to the village through the storm. Our extended family was harder to convince. My grandfather, aunts, and uncles gathered at our cottage that evening. My Uncle Lucas was the first to sneer. "A dream from a boy? Landslides happen every rainy season, Robert. You're turning our family into a laughingstock." But my grandfather, a veteran of 70 winters, remained quiet, puffing on his pipe. "I've never believed in omens," the old man said, leaning on his cane. "But the collapse of the western ridge exactly when the boy predicted cannot be ignored. We won't abandon our ancestral homes just yet, but starting tomorrow, every household will quietly hoard grain, salt, and medicine. Repair your wagons. If the boy's next predictions hold true, we move." A few others joined our desperate, secret race against time. Garrick, the village hunter, believed us because he noticed the forest anomalies. "The game is fleeing the deep woods," Garrick warned, his face tense. "Hordes of river rats are migrating up the ridges. Snakes are leaving their dens. Even the birds are nesting twice as high in the branches. The beasts know a calamity is coming." Master Aldous, the village's elderly, retired scholar, also validated our fears after studying the skies and noting the bizarre behavior of the swirling valley winds. Together, our small faction spent days surreptitiously hauling supplies up to a high, rocky plateau containing a natural cavern system. Garrick and I chopped thick timbers, constructing sturdy, multi-layered log shelters. I insisted on stockpiling a large cache of felled pine trunks and wild vines nearby, preparing for the worst-case scenario. On the 15th day, the sky turned pitch black at noon. The clouds hung so low they practically scraped the treetops. I walked down to the valley creek and gasped. The flowing water had completely stopped, leaving only wet stones and flopping fish. My past life flashed before my eyes. This meant a massive upstream mudslide had temporarily blocked the gorge, acting like a cork, building a colossal, catastrophic pressure that would blow the King's Dam apart ahead of schedule. The 20-day timeline had shrunk. I ran up the slopes, screaming to Garrick, "Sound the alarm. Leave the rest of the supplies. Tell everyone to get to the high ground immediately. The dam is breaking tonight." Hours later, our small group huddled inside the log shelters on the high ridge. The forest was dead silent. No crickets, no frogs, no wind. Barnaby suddenly stood on end, faced north, and let out a blood-curdling, thundering howl. Then came the rumble. It was a deep, guttural vibration that shook the bones in our chests. A massive explosion tore through the northern horizon. Through the lightning flashes, we saw a towering, white crest of pulverized water and debris, easily overriding the tree canopy, obliterating everything in its path. Screams of agony drifted up from the lower valley, as Oakhaven was erased from the map in a matter of seconds. Fields, stone bridges, taverns, all swallowed by a swirling, violent sea. Some of our neighbors fell to their knees, weeping bitterly for the stubborn friends who had mocked us and chosen to stay behind. The water rose with terrifying speed, licking at the base of our high plateau and flooding our lowest shelters waist-deep. Heavy logs from upstream began battering our structures. "Launch the pine rafts! Tie the leather guidelines to the old oaks!" I roared against the howling gale. Garrick and the young men pushed out our prefabricated timber rafts, anchoring them to create a massive floating barrier to absorb the impact of the debris. Suddenly, a flash of lightning revealed two figures clinging to a spinning tree trunk in the violent current just off the ridge. It was my Uncle Lucas and his young son. They had delayed their evacuation to pack heirloom silver, and had been caught by the surge. "Hold the rope, Garrick!" I shouted, tying a thick leather line around my waist and diving head first into the freezing, churning abyss. The current felt like a monstrous hand trying to tear my limbs apart. A jagged branch sliced open my shoulder, but I ignored the pain, swimming with every ounce of strength I possessed until I reached the spinning trunk. "Uncle! Give me the boy!" I screamed. Lucas, white-faced and shivering, pushed his son into my arms. "Save him, Alden. Save my boy." I strapped the child to my chest, locked my arm around Lucas's collar, and yanked the rope twice. Up on the ridge, my father, Garrick, and the villagers pulled with a unified roar. We were dragged across the crashing waves and hauled onto the muddy banks, gasping for air but alive. Lucas collapsed into the mud, weeping and clutching his son in profound gratitude. Thanks to our meticulous preparation, our high-ground sanctuary held fast against the tide, a solitary island of life in a vast sea of death. When the sun finally broke through the gray mist days later, the world below was unrecognizable. A ruined expanse of thick mud and rotting debris covered the valley. Survivors from other villages, who had scrambled up trees, were now dying of thirst and consuming the contaminated floodwaters, triggering an immediate outbreak of the deadly bloody flux. But on our ridge, I enforced absolute military discipline. "No one touches the valley water," I commanded. "We use only the mountain spring and filtered rainwater. Boil everything thrice over the hearth." Every day, Garrick and I used our high-proof moonshine to sanitize our tools and boots. My mother and aunt managed the charcoal filtration barrels and rationed our coarse food into hot, filling stews of dried potatoes and bran porridge. Anyone showing the slightest cough was immediately given boiled herbal bark. Through these strict measures, our camp remained entirely untouched by the pestilence. On the 10th day, a grand royal barge bearing the sigil of the local magistrate slowly rode into the flooded valley. It carried no relief grain. Instead, the magistrate, desperate to recoup his own financial losses from the disaster, had brought a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. They docked at our ridge, and their captain drew his broadsword, eyeing our high stacks of grain sacks. "By decree of the magistrate, all provisions are hereby requisitioned for the king's storehouses. Any peasant who resists will be executed for treason." My father and Lucas stepped back in fear, but I stepped forward, locking eyes with Garrick. Clack! Clack! Garrick and 10 of our best archers stepped from the tree line, heavy hunting bows drawn taut, steel-tipped arrows aimed directly at the magistrate's throat. The hardened, feral gaze of men who had just conquered an apocalypse made the mercenaries freeze in their tracks. Before blood could be spilled, old Master Aldous calmly walked out of the central shelter. He unrolled a thick, heavy vellum document bearing a glittering, wax-sealed crest. It was an official charter of autonomous protection, personally signed years ago by the High Chancellor of the realm, a man who had been Aldous's former pupil. "You dare threaten this sanctuary, magistrate?" Aldous's voice boomed with aristocratic authority. "Look upon this seal. We are a chartered sanctuary, operating under crown immunity. We have used our own coin to save these citizens. I have already drafted a detailed ledger regarding how the dam repair funds were embezzled by your office, and it is currently en route to the capital via royal courier. If your men take 1 grain of wheat from this ridge, I will ensure your head rolls on the executioner's block before the next moon." Hearing the words High Chancellor and seeing the immutable royal seal, the magistrate turned a ghastly shade of pale. He knew that if an imperial audit took place, his entire bloodline would face the gallows. Faced with an entrenched, armed populace and a legal death warrant, the magistrate choked back his pride. "A mistake? A mere misunderstanding?" he stammered, backing away. "Back to the boats, you fools! We move elsewhere." The barge turned and rode away in humiliating retreat. 1 moon later, the floodwaters fully receded, leaving behind a thick layer of rich, dark mountain silt that promised incredibly fertile soil for the years to come. We chose never to rebuild in the dangerous, low-lying basin. Instead, we cleared the lower slopes of the ridge, founding a new settlement we aptly named High Haven. The early days were grueling, but our youth felled timber, our women broke the new soil, and the precious sacks of seed grain we had guarded with our lives finally took root in the earth. By late autumn, the slopes were carpeted in a magnificent, heavy sea of golden wheat. We had survived. Before the first snows fell, the king's justiciar arrived from the capital with a battalion of royal knights. Following an intense investigation backed by Master Aldous' ledgers and testimonies from the valley survivors, the corrupt magistrate and his co-conspirators were arrested, stripped of their titles, and hauled away in iron chains to await royal justice. I stood on the highest precipice of High Haven, the crisp autumn wind whipping through my woolen cloak. I watched the prison carriage disappear into the mountain pass, then turned back to look at our thriving village. Smoke drifted peacefully from the stone chimneys. Inside our cottage, my father was stoking a roaring, warm hearth fire, while little Liam sat nearby, diligently practicing his letters under the watchful eye of Master Aldous. I smiled, a true, unburdened smile, spanning 2 lifetimes of grief and triumph. Years have passed since that terrible spring, and High Haven has grown into a bustling, prosperous town. On cold winter nights, when the wind howls through the crags, the town elders still gather the children around the hearth fire. They tell them of the night the world broke, of the black waters that swallowed the old valley, and of the plague that followed. And always, they speak of the 19-year-old boy who had the courage to see the future, defy the world, and drag his people out of the jaws of hell.